is 100% fiction. All elements are imaginary. Coincidences with reality are accidental. But 18. Entertainment only. Helena found her father on his knees in the middle of the living room. It wasn't unusual, not in the way it should have been. Over the last 3 years, she had come home to find Gerald Marsh in positions no daughter should ever have to witness. Passed out over unpaid bills, crying in the hallway with an empty bottle beside him, whispering apologies to walls that didn't answer back. She had learned to process each scene in silence, lock the horror into a sealed compartment somewhere deep in her chest, and simply move on to solving whatever problem came next. But this time, there were other men in the room. 2 of them flanked her father like walls wearing suits. A third stood near the window with his back to her, looking down at the street below as though the entire city belonged to him, and he was simply deciding what to do with what was left of it. "Dad." Helena's voice came out steadier than she felt. She set her teacher's bag down by the entrance without taking her eyes off the room. "What's going on?" Gerald lifted his face. Red-rimmed eyes, trembling mouth, the expression of a man who finally understood exactly how deep the hole he dug was, and had just touched the bottom. "Helena, I can explain." "Mr. Marsh doesn't need to explain anything." The man by the window turned around. Helena had seen intimidating men before. She taught at a public middle school on the south side of Chicago. She had faced furious parents, corrupt administrators, and 13-year-olds who believed that a sustained stare was a valid form of communication. She knew intimidation. But Nikolai Volkov was a different category of thing entirely. It wasn't just the height, though he clearly used every inch of his 6'2" frame as a standing argument. It wasn't the eyes, dark gray, the kind that gave nothing away. It was the stillness. A stillness that didn't read as calm. It read as control. The tattoo on his neck rose above his collar. Dark, geometric lines. The kind of artwork that didn't ask permission to exist. He looked her over from head to toe with the same expression she used when evaluating 8th grade essays. Efficient, impersonal, searching for something specific. "You're the daughter." It wasn't a question. "And you're in my apartment without an invitation." Neither was that. Something moved across his face. It didn't quite reach the level of an expression. It came and went too fast. "Sit down, Ms. Marsh." "I'm not going to sit down in my own living room because a stranger told me to." Helena crossed her arms. Her heart was hammering, but she had learned long ago not to let her body betray what her mind was processing. 23 years of practice. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "Nikolai Volkov." He said the name as though it were sufficient, as though she was supposed to recognize it and react in some specific, predetermined way. She didn't react, not because she didn't know the name. Anyone who moved in certain circles in Chicago knew the name Volkov, but because showing fear to this type of man was the same as handing over ammunition for free. "Mr. Volkov." She kept her voice level. "Why are you in my living room?" "Your father's debt." The silence that followed had physical weight. Helena didn't look at Gerald. She knew that if she looked now, she'd see the truth on his face before he could wrap it in excuses. And she needed the numbers first, before she let herself feel anything at all. "How much?" she asked. Nikolai reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed an envelope on the coffee table. He didn't drop it. He placed it with the precision of someone accustomed to objects staying exactly where he decided they should be. Helena stepped forward, opened the envelope, read. The numbers took 3 seconds to register, then 5 more for her to accept that she had registered them correctly. "This is accumulated over the last 18 months. With interest." Nikolai stood 2 meters away, arms relaxed at his sides, completely unhurried. "Your father has a considerable talent for choosing the wrong bet." "Dad." This time Helena's voice came out differently, smaller. 18 months? Gerald Marsh looked at the floor. That was the answer. Helena took one slow breath, folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and turned to face Nikolai Volkov with the exact expression she used when a student had been caught cheating, and she was about to explain, in very precise terms, what happened next. "What's the offer? Because you didn't come here personally at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night to collect a debt. You have people for that." Nikolai looked at her for a moment. That stillness again. Measuring, weighing, deciding. "I need 2 things." He said it with the same inflection someone might use to order coffee. "A kidney and an American wife." Helena blinked. "Say that again." "I have a renal condition. Hereditary. My doctor has been recommending a transplant for the next 18 months. He spoke without any shift in tone, as though describing a problem that belonged to someone else entirely. Additionally, I have business interests that require significant expansion in the United States. American partners prefer working with someone who has verifiable ties to this country. An American wife with a clean record simplifies a number of processes. And the kidney? Helena heard her own voice land in a register slightly different from normal. You may be compatible, we would run tests. If you are, the surgery would be scheduled several months after the wedding. Helena went very still. It was the kind of stillness she built when she needed to process too much information in too little time. A skill developed in childhood, refined in adolescence, essential in adult life with Gerald Marsh as her father. She looked at Nikolai Volkov and saw that he was waiting, not with anxiety, with the patience of someone unaccustomed to not getting what he wanted, and therefore in no particular hurry, because the outcome was already decided in his mind. That, more than the bodyguards, more than the numbers on the paper, was what sent the cold moving down her spine. What if I'm not compatible? She asked. I'll still need the wife. And if I refuse everything? Nikolai tilted his head very slightly. It was the only expressive movement she had seen from him so far. Your father's debt comes due tomorrow at midnight, he said. Without the arrangement I'm offering, standard terms apply. Helena knew enough about how her father's world worked to understand what standard terms meant. She didn't need to ask. She looked at Gerald, the man who had taught her to ride a bike in an empty parking lot when she was 6 years old, who had slept in a hospital corridor when she had her appendix out at 12 because he couldn't stand to be far from her, who had cried at her mother's funeral like the ground had vanished beneath his feet. And in a way it had, because Gerald Marsh, without the woman who balanced him, had become someone Helena recognized by face but not by behavior. She couldn't hate him. She had tried. It was easier than what she actually felt. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow at noon. Nikolai retrieved the envelope from the table. My contact will leave a number. He walked toward the door with measured steps, the two men moving automatically to follow. At the doorway, he stopped without turning around. Ms. Marsh. What? You asked the right questions. Most people don't. And he was gone. Helena stood in the middle of her living room for exactly 45 seconds. She counted because counting things helped her not implode, and then walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, drank all of it, and went back to the living room where her father was still sitting in the same spot, hands now over his face. Helena. Not right now, Dad. I know that Not right now. She sat on the couch, opened the calculator app on her phone, and started running numbers. Her teacher's salary, savings, the apartment's value if she sold, which she couldn't because she rented, how much she could get on a personal loan, how long it would take to pay off even a fraction of the debt. The numbers didn't work. They were never going to work. Helena set her phone face down and stared at the ceiling. The problem with being the responsible one was that you didn't get the luxury of falling apart when you needed to. There was always something to fix. Always a next bill, a next problem, a next crisis of her father's that needed to be managed before you were allowed to feel anything about the previous one. She was 23 years old. She taught 32 seventh graders who tested her every single day and left the classroom with a little more vocabulary and math than they'd walked in with. She woke up early, went to bed late, saved wherever she could, and still the whole world seemed wider than her arms could reach. And now a man had walked into her living room and placed a proposal on her coffee table with the energy of someone ordering takeout, a kidney, and an American wife. Is he serious? She asked the ceiling. About the kidney? Yes. Gerald's voice was small. I've heard he's had the condition for years, that his doctor has been pushing for it. And he thought, what? That he could just walk in here and... The debt is real, Helena. I know you know that. She did know. It was the kind of thing she'd suspected for months. The withdrawals from the account that didn't match the household bills, the way her father avoided eye contact whenever money came up, the phone calls he let go to voicemail. She had chosen not to confirm it because confirming meant acting, and acting meant having a conversation both of them had been avoiding for far too long. How long have you known he might show up here? She asked. Silence. Dad, 3 weeks, Gerald said to his own hands. He sent word. I thought I'd be able to sort it out before it came to this. Helena closed her eyes. 3 weeks. Her father had known for 3 weeks that a man from the Volkov family might show up at their door, and he had said nothing. Had let Helena go to work every day, prepare lesson plans, grade papers, complain about the terrible coffee in the teacher's lounge, without saying a single word. She didn't let the anger grow. She stored it. Later, He said he needs an American wife for business reasons, she said. Is that real or is it a cover? It's real. The Volkovs are expanding operations stateside. Local partners are easier to manage when you have verifiable ties. It makes the whole operation look cleaner. And renal compatibility. How do they test for that? Blood work first. Blood type. Antigens. If you pass that, more tests follow. Helena opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling again. The question wasn't whether she wanted to. Wanting wasn't on the menu. The question was what happened if she said no, and what happened if she said yes. No. The debt came due tomorrow at midnight, and she had looked at the men in her living room long enough to know they weren't decorations. Yes, she would be marrying a man who had walked into her home, made a proposal about her as though she were a line item in a business ledger, and left without even pretending there was a human dimension to the conversation. She sat up, looked at her father, and made a decision. Not because it was the right one, but because it was the only one she could live with the consequences of. Do you have the contact number? She asked. Helena. The number, Dad. Gerald rose slowly, went to the kitchen, came back with a plain business card. Just a number. No name. Helena took the card, looked at it for a moment, and reached for her phone. What are you going to do? Gerald's voice was broken. I'm going to call tomorrow morning, she said. I'll agree to the tests. And if I'm compatible, I'll make a decision about the rest. I'm so sorry. I know. You don't deserve. I know, Dad. She said it without anger. That was the worst part. They both knew it. The absence of anger was the kind of thing that hurt more than screaming would have. Helena went to her bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the business card in her hand. Nikolai Volkov. She had heard the name before. Anyone familiar with the parallel market structures of Chicago had heard it. Eldest son, the heir to the operation. People said he was the kind of man who made decisions with the emotional temperature of stone and slept perfectly afterward. Tonight she had confirmed that the second part was probably accurate. I need a kidney and an American wife. Helena looked at the ceiling of her own bedroom this time. More familiar. With the crack in the corner she had been meaning to ask the landlord to fix for 6 months. Okay, she said out loud. To no one. To herself. To a universe that apparently had a very specific sense of humor. Okay. Tomorrow morning she would call the number on the card. She would agree to the tests. And depending on the results, she would do the most objectively absurd thing a functional adult human being could do. Seriously consider marrying a man who had treated her like an item on a shopping list, as though that were a reasonable solution to anything. The problem, and she recognized it was a character flaw, was that part of her was already cataloging the details. The stillness of him, the way he had placed the envelope on the table, the fact that when he said you asked the right questions there was something in his voice that wasn't a compliment and wasn't an insult, and she couldn't quite identify what it was. Helena was a teacher. Reading people was both profession and survival. Nikolai Volkov was the first person in a long time she couldn't read. That was, objectively, a problem. She set the card on the nightstand, lay back on the bed, crossed her arms over her chest, and stared at the crack in the ceiling. Tomorrow. She called at 8:47 in the morning. Not because she had slept on it and felt better. She hadn't slept at all. She called because she had lain awake doing the same math 17 different ways, and kept arriving at the same answer, and at some point continuing to calculate became a way of avoiding the inevitable rather than preparing for it. The phone rang twice. Ms. Marsh. Nikolai's voice was exactly as she remembered it. No surprise. No warmth. The tone of a man who had simply been waiting for the correct sequence of events to occur. I'll do the tests, Helena said. She was standing in the kitchen in yesterday's clothes, coffee going cold on the counter beside her. Blood work first. If I'm not compatible, we discuss the rest separately. A pause. Brief. Agreed. My driver will pick you up at 10. I have work. I'm aware. This will take less than an hour. Helena looked at her cold coffee. I'll need to be at school by noon. You'll be there by 11:30. Another pause, shorter than the first. Bring your insurance card. The clinic is private. Of course it is, she said, mostly to herself. She thought she heard something on the other end of the line. Not quite a sound, more like the absence of the silence she expected. 10 o'clock, Ms. Marsh. He hung up. The car was black, clean, and aggressively unremarkable, the kind of vehicle designed to move through a city without being remembered. The driver didn't speak, which Helena respected. She had nothing to say either. The clinic was in River North, tucked between a law office and an architecture firm, the kind of address that said expensive and discreet in the same breath. No signage beyond a small brass plate beside the door. Helena had walked past buildings like this her entire life without ever having reason to go inside one. Nikolai was already there. He was standing near the reception desk, not sitting, speaking in low tones with a man in a white coat who had the bearing of someone who had signed more non-disclosure agreements than birthday cards. When Helena walked in, Nikolai turned and looked at her with the same thorough, impersonal assessment as the night before. She was wearing her work clothes, a dark green blouse, black slacks, her good flats. She had put her hair up. She looked, she knew, like exactly what she was. A middle school teacher who had been awake all night and was running on spite and caffeine. His expression didn't change. She wasn't sure it could. "Ms. Marsh," he gestured toward the hallway. "Dr. Harmon will take your blood work. The initial results will come back within 48 hours. And if I'm compatible, we'll meet to discuss the arrangement in full. And if I'm not, we'll meet to discuss the arrangement in full." He said it the exact same way. Helena tilted her head. "Those sound like the same sentence." "They are." She studied him for a moment. In the daylight, or what passed for daylight in a clinic with carefully calibrated lighting, he looked less like a threat and more like a fact. Something immovable and impersonal, like weather. The tattoo at his neck was more visible now. She caught the edge of what looked like a compass rose before she made herself stop looking. "You said last night that you need an American wife for business," she said. "I want to understand what that actually means before any arrangement is discussed. What would be expected of me?" Nikolai looked at her with an expression that might, on another human being, have been mild surprise. "You want the terms now? I want to know what I'm being tested for." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Dr. Harmon. "Give us a minute." The doctor disappeared down the hallway with the efficiency of a man paid very well to be elsewhere when needed. Nikolai clasped his hands in front of him. It was the first time she had seen him make a gesture that read as anything other than absolute neutrality. Public appearances when required, family events, meetings with certain partners where a wife's presence is expected. He said, "You would maintain your own life, your job, your routines. There would be a residence provided, but no restrictions on your movement. How long? Minimum 2 years. Reassessed after. Reassessed how? Mutually." Helena folded her arms. "And the kidney? If you're compatible and willing, the surgery would occur no earlier than 6 months in. You would have full recovery time and medical support. The decision remains yours." "The decision remains mine," she repeated slowly. "But the debt disappears either way if I marry you. The debt is cleared upon signing. And my father?" Something shifted in his expression. "Barely. The way a shadow moves when a cloud passes. You almost miss it. Your father's safety is guaranteed as long as the arrangement holds. I need that in writing. You'll have it." Helena looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without shifting, without filling the silence, without doing any of the things that people normally did when silence stretched past comfortable. Most people, she had learned, couldn't stand quiet. They rushed to fill it, and in rushing they revealed things. Nikolai Volkov stood in silence like he owned it. "One more question," she said. "Go ahead." "Why me specifically?" "My father owes money to half the underground card rooms in Chicago. You could have leveraged any of them. Why come to us personally?" The pause this time was different, not calculating. Something else she couldn't name. "Your father's debt came to me through a specific channel," Nikolai said. "When I looked into it, your profile came up. Clean record, stable employment, American-born, no family complications beyond your father, no prior associations with any organizations." He stopped. "You were the most straightforward option. Most straightforward option." Helena let that sit in the air between them. "I'm going to pretend that isn't one of the stranger things anyone has ever said to me. It was meant practically, not personally. I understand that. That's actually the strange part." For the second time, something moved across his face too fast to catch. This time she was almost certain it was something adjacent to amusement. Not quite, but adjacent. "Dr. Harmon will see you now," Nikolai said. The blood draw took 8 minutes. Dr. Harmon was precise, quiet, and had the hands of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Helena sat in the clean white chair, watched the vial fill, and thought about her 7th graders. Period 3 on Fridays was her hardest class. 31 kids, 2 of whom had IEPs she was still learning, one who only responded when she called on him in Spanish, and a girl in the back row named Destiny who was, Helena was increasingly convinced, significantly smarter than the curriculum gave her credit for. She thought about Destiny, and the essay she was going to return today with a note in the margin. This argument is stronger than you think. Push it further. And the way Destiny always pretended not to care about the notes and then came back the following week having clearly pushed it further. She thought about this because it was real, because it was hers, because sitting in a private clinic in River North with a vial of her own blood being labeled with practice deficiency was the kind of thing that could untether a person from their sense of reality if they let it. And Helena had no intention of being untethered. She was still herself. She was still a teacher on the South Side with a cracked ceiling and 32 kids counting on her showing up on time. That didn't change because a man with a neck tattoo and no readable expression needed a wife. Nikolai was on the phone when she came back out. He ended the call when he saw her. No wrap-up, no, "I'll call you back, just done." And that small thing registered somewhere she filed away for later. Results in 48 hours. Dr. Harmon handed her a small card. "Direct line if you have questions." Helena pocketed it. She turned to Nikolai. "I need to be direct about something," she said. "You've been direct about everything so far. Then I'll continue. If I agree to this arrangement, fully agree after the tests, I need you to understand that I'm not decorative. I won't perform a role I don't understand. If you need me somewhere, I need to know why, and I need enough information to do it well. I don't function in the dark." Nikolai looked at her. "That's reasonable," he said. Helena had prepared for negotiation. She had not prepared for immediate agreement, and it briefly threw her. "Good," she recovered. "I also won't quit my job. I didn't ask you to. Just making it clear." Noted. He held the door open for her. She walked through it, and for a fraction of a second she was close enough to catch something. Cedar, maybe, or something darker. Clean. Unexpected. The car was waiting at the curb. "Ms. Marsh." His voice stopped her at the bottom of the steps. She turned. "You'll be at school by 11:20, he said. "I had the driver take a different route to account for traffic on Michigan." Helena looked at him. He was already looking back at his phone. She got in the car. 11:19 when she walked through the school's front doors. She stopped in the hallway outside her classroom, took one breath, straightened her blouse, and went in. 32 faces turned toward her. "All right," she said, dropping her bag on the desk. "Let's talk about persuasive writing. Specifically how to make an argument so airtight that the person on the other side of it has no reasonable choice but to agree with you." From the back row, Destiny looked up from her notebook with an expression that said she suspected there was something else going on. Helena suspected Destiny was right. The results came back in 31 hours. Helena was in the middle of grading papers when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, which she now recognized as a pattern. She set down her red pen, looked at the screen, and answered. "Ms. Marsh." Dr. Harmon's voice was measured, professional, carrying the particular neutrality of someone trained to deliver information without editorializing. "Your initial panel came back. Blood type match. Antigen compatibility is strong. We'd want a full workup to confirm, but preliminarily, you're a viable candidate." Helena was quiet for a moment. "Understood," she said. "Thank you." She hung up and looked at the stack of ungraded essays on her coffee table. Period 3, Persuasive Writing Unit. Destiny's was on top, 12 paragraphs, twice the required length, an argument about the school district's standardized testing policy that was frankly better reasoned than most op-eds Helena had read that month. She picked up her red pen, wrote "This is the best thing you've turned in all year" in the margin, set it aside. Then she stared at the wall for a while. Compatible. She had spent 31 hours constructing a quiet internal argument for why it probably wouldn't matter, why the tests would come back negative and the question of the kidney would be removed from the table, and she could focus exclusively on the marriage question, which was already absurd enough on its own. That argument was now void. She picked up the business card from the nightstand. He answered on the first ring this time. "I heard," Nikolai said. "Dr. Harmon called you first?" "He called us simultaneously." Helena absorbed that. "I see. Are you available tomorrow evening?" "For what?" "Dinner. To discuss full terms." She looked around her apartment. The stack of essays, the cold tea on the counter, the crack in the ceiling that the landlord still hadn't fixed. Then she looked at the business card in her hand. "What time?" she asked. The restaurant was in the West Loop, the kind of place with no prices on the menu and lighting so precise it felt architectural. Helena wore the nicest thing she owned that wasn't reserved for parent-teacher conferences. A deep burgundy dress her mother had bought her 4 years ago, which still fit and still felt like armor. Nikolai was already seated. He stood when she approached the table, which she had not expected, and it briefly disorganized her. Ms. Marsh, Mr. Volkov. She sat, looked at the menu. Not a single price. You know, you could have just emailed me a contract. I could have. He sat across from her and opened his own menu with the ease of someone who ate in places like this, the way she ate at her kitchen counter. I find terms are better established in person. People agree to things in writing they haven't actually decided about yet. Helena looked up. That's surprisingly perceptive. You sound surprised. I'm adjusting my expectations in real time. Bear with me. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. She was starting to catalog these, the almost expressions, the fraction of a second departures from his default flatline. This one was the closest to a smile she had seen yet. A server appeared. Nikolai ordered without looking at the menu, which meant he had been here before, probably often. Helena ordered the thing she recognized and could pronounce, which narrowed the field considerably. When the server left, Nikolai placed a folder on the table between them. The formal terms, he said. I'd like to walk through them with you directly, rather than have you read them alone, and form questions I'm not present to answer. Helena opened the folder. How considerate. Practical. Right, practical. She began to read. The terms were objectively more reasonable than she had expected. The residence was a separate floor in a building he owned in Lincoln Park. Her own space, her own entrance, full autonomy. The public appearances were listed specifically, 6 to 8 per year, family events included. Her salary would continue unchanged. He would not interfere with her employment or daily routine. The debt was cleared on the day of signing. And then, near the bottom, in the same clean legal language as everything else, in the event Ms. Marsh is confirmed as a compatible donor and consents to the procedure, all associated medical costs will be covered in full. The decision to proceed remains solely at Ms. Marsh's discretion and may be withdrawn at any time without consequence to the terms of the arrangement. Helena read that paragraph twice. This is, she started. Read it completely before you comment, Nikolai said. Not unkindly, just precise. She read it completely. Then she set it down. The kidney clause is genuinely optional, she said. I said that from the beginning. People say a lot of things from the beginning that change shape once paperwork appears. Look at the paperwork, he said simply. She had. It said what he said it said. Helena leaned back in her chair and looked at him. In the warm light of the restaurant, he looked different than he had in the clinic, less like a fact and more like a person, though she had the sense that was the lighting's work more than any change in him. The neck tattoo was partially visible above his collar. She had looked it up after the clinic. A compass rose partially and something else she hadn't identified yet. Can I ask you something that isn't about the contract? She said. Go ahead. Why a wife at all? You clearly run your operation effectively. You have... She gestured vaguely at the folder, the restaurant, the general atmosphere of controlled authority he carried everywhere. All of this. Why does a wife make the business work better? Nikolai was quiet for a moment. The families we're negotiating with in this expansion are old money, he said. Chicago, Detroit. 2 groups in New York, old structures. They operate on a specific idea of what a serious man looks like. A serious man has a household, a stake in the city beyond his business. He paused. It's theater, but effective theater requires accurate staging, and I'm part of the staging. You're the most important part of it. Helena considered that. You know most people would find that insulting. Most people would. Do you? She thought about it. No, I find it strangely honest, which might be its own problem. This time the corner of his mouth moved and stayed for a full second before returning to neutral. She counted it as a win. The food arrived. They ate, and for a few minutes the conversation paused in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, which was itself unexpected. Helena was accustomed to silences that demanded to be filled. This one didn't ask anything of her. The families you mentioned, she said eventually. Are any of them a problem? Nikolai set down his fork, looked at her. Why do you ask? Because you have lawyers who could have drawn up a contract and a driver who could have delivered it. You came to my apartment yourself. You're doing this dinner yourself. She met his eyes steadily. You're involved at a level that suggests the stakes are higher than you've described. I want to know what I'm walking into. The silence that followed was different from the others. heavier. There is a family, the Renner Group, based in Detroit, that has been expanding into territory we consider ours, Nikolai said. They are not interested in negotiation. A consolidated household, stable American roots, legitimate social presence. It makes our operation structurally harder to dismantle, legally and otherwise. So the wife isn't just theater for old money partners. She's also a structural defense. Yes. Against people who are actively a threat. Yes. Helena looked at him. And you're telling me this now because you asked the right questions. He said it the same way he had in her living room 2 nights ago. Same words. Different weight. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant windows, Chicago moved in its usual organized chaos. Cabs, pedestrians, the distant percussion of the L train. I need to know one more thing, she said. Ask. If I'm in danger at any point. Real danger, not theoretical. What happens? Nikolai looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of absolute seriousness. It wasn't harder than his baseline. It was more focused, like a lens adjusting. Nothing happens to you, he said. That is not a negotiable term. I didn't see it in the contract. Some terms don't require paper. Helena held his gaze. He held hers. Neither of them looked away, and the moment stretched past the point where normal people blinked first, and she had the specific and somewhat inconvenient realization that she believed him, not because he was warm, not because he had charmed her, or reassured her, or done any of the things people did when they wanted to be trusted, because he said it like a fact, the way the sun rises, the way water is cold. Nothing happens to you. She picked up her pen from beside the folder. I have 3 amendments, she said. Nikolai blinked. It was the most expressive thing she had seen him do. Go ahead. First, if I'm required at a public event, I get 48 hours notice minimum. I have lesson plans. I can't rearrange a classroom around same-day requests. She uncapped the pen. Second, my father stays in Chicago. He doesn't get relocated or managed or whatever word you people use for that. He's in a program. He needs his routine. Agreed, Nikolai said. And the third? Helena looked at him. The compass rose. She said, on your neck. What's the rest of it? The silence lasted 2 full seconds. That's your 3rd amendment? I like to know who I'm making agreements with, the visible parts and the ones that aren't. Nikolai held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached up and loosened his collar button, just the top one, a single, precise movement, and tilted his chin slightly upward. The tattoo extended further than she'd seen. The compass rose anchored a larger piece. Coordinates, she realized. A specific location marked with the kind of permanence that meant it mattered. Chicago coordinates, he said. The corner where my brother was killed. 8 years ago. Helena set her pen down. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. Don't be. It's accurate information. You asked for it. He refastened the button. It also means I understand what it costs to lose someone you were responsible for protecting. Helena thought about her father on his knees in the living room. About the 3 weeks he'd kept quiet. Yes, she said quietly. I think I understand that too. She picked up her pen and signed the first page. The building in Lincoln Park was not what she expected. Helena had constructed a mental image over the 4 days between signing and moving. Something cold, over-designed, the architectural equivalent of Nikolai himself. Glass and steel and surfaces that didn't invite touching. She had prepared herself for it the way she prepared for difficult parent meetings. Shoulders back, expression neutral, ready to absorb whatever the room decided to be. The building was a converted brownstone, late 1800s bones, carefully maintained, the kind of structure that had outlasted every trend around it through the simple stubbornness of good construction. Her floor was the 3rd, its own entrance from a side stairwell, original hardwood floors, windows that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that felt almost aggressive in its pleasantness. There was a bookshelf on the east wall, already filled. Helena set her first box down and walked to it slowly. History, mostly. American and European. A section on architecture. 2 shelves of what looked like Russian literature and English translation. At the end of one shelf, tucked without ceremony between a Dostoevsky and a book on Chicago urban planning, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she took out her phone. There are books in my apartment, she said when he answered. Yes, Nikolai said. Did you put them there? My assistant sourced them based on your profile. My profile. Helena looked at the shelf. My profile includes To Kill a Mockingbird. You have a graduate degree in English literature. It seemed reasonable. It's my favorite book. A pause. I'm aware. Helena closed her eyes briefly. How are you aware of that? Your school bio. You listed it under recommended reading for incoming students. She opened her eyes, looked at the book again, filed the information in the compartment she was building specifically for things about Nikolai Volkov that she didn't know what to do with yet. Thank you, she said. It's practical. Comfortable employees perform better. I'm not your employee. Comfortable people in arrangements perform better. A beat. There's food in the kitchen. My housekeeper stocked it this morning. If there are things you prefer, send a list to the number I'll forward you. Nikolai. The use of his first name landed in a small silence. Yes, he said. I don't need a housekeeper to stock my kitchen. I've been feeding myself since I was 16. I know. Then, consider it a resource, not a service. Use it if it's useful. Ignore it if it isn't. Another pause, this one slightly different in texture. The first event is Saturday, a dinner at my uncle's house. I'll send the details. He hung up with the same efficiency as always. Helena looked at her boxes, at the bookshelf, at the eastern windows full of pale November light. Okay, she said to the room. The room, unlike her old apartment, had good bones and said nothing back. Saturday arrived faster than she was ready for. Nikolai's uncle, Dmitry Volkov, which Helena had looked up because she did not walk into any room unprepared, was 61 years old, had immigrated from St. Petersburg at 22, and had built the original Chicago operation before handing the structural leadership to Nikolai 3 years ago. He was described in the 3 separate sources she found as either a brilliant strategist or a profoundly dangerous man, depending on which side of his decisions you had been on. The house was in Kenilworth, large, old, lit from every window as the car pulled up the drive. His wife's name is Vera, Nikolai said from beside her in the back seat, eyes on his phone. She'll ask you about your family. Answer honestly about your mother. She respects loss acknowledged directly. How long was she married to your uncle before she trusted him? Nikolai looked up from his phone. What? I'm trying to calibrate the timeline, Helena said. How long until the family stopped treating her like an outsider? He studied her. 4 years. And she was Russian. Yes. So my timeline is longer, probably. He put his phone away, which she had learned meant the conversation was being given full attention. Vera will be your best advocate if she decides to like you. She decides quickly and doesn't reverse. What makes her decide? She asks one question early in the night. Your answer to it determines everything. What's the question? If I knew, I'd tell you. She changes it every time. Helena looked out the window at the house. That's either a test of character or a test of instinct. With Vera, they're the same thing. The car stopped. The driver opened her door before she reached for the handle, which she was still not used to. She stepped out into the cold November air, and Nikolai was beside her in a movement that was so practiced it seemed choreographed, his hand placed at the small of her back. Light, barely there, purely structural. She kept her expression neutral. The warmth of it was an inconvenient fact she catalogued without comment. Vera Volkov was a small woman with silver hair and eyes the specific shade of dark blue that suggested she had spent decades looking at things directly and forming accurate opinions. She embraced Nikolai at the door the way women embrace men they raised or helped raise, with the authority of someone who had earned the right to that contact. Then she turned to Helena and looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. You're taller than I expected, Vera said. I get that a lot, Helena said. Nikolai said you're a teacher. 7th grade, South Side. Vera's expression shifted slightly. That requires patience. It requires being comfortable with chaos and having a very loud indoor voice. Vera looked at her for 1 more second. Then she smiled. Quick, decided exactly as advertised, and said, Come inside. It's cold and the food is ready, and Dmitry has been talking about wine for 40 minutes and someone needs to redirect him. Helena followed her in. Behind her, she heard Nikolai exhale, barely, almost nothing, and she had the distinct sense that whatever the question was this year, she had just answered it. Dinner was 8 people, Dmitry at the head of the table, larger than she expected, with Nikolai's gray eyes 20 years deeper, and beside him Vera, who ran the table's conversation with the gentle, iron authority of a woman who had learned that the most effective control was invisible. 2 cousins whose names Helena locked in immediately. Rafe, mid-30s, watchful, who looked at her the way someone checks the structural integrity of a bridge before crossing, and Lena, early 30s, who looked at her the way someone checks a bridge and quietly hopes it holds. The other three were business associates, present and quiet, there to be seen more than heard. Helena sat beside Nikolai and was grateful, for the first time in her professional life, that she spent her days in a room where 7 things demanded her attention simultaneously. Dinner with the Volkovs was not unlike a difficult parent night. Multiple agendas, subtext under every sentence, and the constant low-grade requirement to be both authentic and strategic at once. She managed. More than managed, she realized, about 40 minutes in. She was having an actual conversation with Dmitri about the urban development patterns in post-war Chicago. He knew the subject genuinely, not as small talk, and when she pushed back on one of his points about the South Side, he looked at her the way academics looked at each other when they realized the room was more interesting than expected. "She argues with you," Dmitri said to Nikolai with the tone of someone making an unexpected but positive observation. "Frequently," Nikolai said. "Good." Dmitri picked up his wine. "The last person who stopped arguing with me was your father, and look how that ended." The table shifted slightly. Not dramatically. These were people who knew how to absorb weight without showing it. But Helena registered the shift, and beside her she felt Nikolai go very still, in the specific way that meant something had landed in a place he kept guarded. She reached for her water glass and said to Dmitri, "What did your father argue with you about?" Dmitri blinked, then laughed. A real one, the kind that couldn't be produced on request. Chess. He thought the queen was overvalued. I told him the queen was the only piece that understood the whole board. He wasn't wrong that she's overvalued in the wrong hands. Helena said, "The queen is only effective if the player is willing to lose her." Dmitri looked at her for a long moment. Then at Nikolai. "Keep her," he said simply, and went back to his wine. Rafe, across the table, caught Helena's eye for a fraction of a second. Something passed in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but the particular recognition of someone who had been waiting to see what kind of person arrived and had just received their answer. Under the table, Nikolai's hand found her wrist. Brief, 2 seconds. His thumb pressed once against her pulse point. Not romantic, not calculated. Something involuntary and precise, like a person checking that something fragile was still intact. Helena didn't move. Her pulse was not, she noted, as steady as she would have liked. The drive back was quiet until Lincoln Park. "Rafe will be a problem," Helena said. Nikolai turned to look at her. "Explain." "He spent the whole dinner evaluating me. Not the way Vera did. She was deciding whether to trust me. Rafe was calculating something." She looked at her hands in her lap. "He looked at you twice when he thought you weren't watching. Both times after I said something Dmitri responded to." Nikolai was quiet. That could mean he's protective of Dmitri's attention, or it could mean he's measuring how much influence I have before I've been here long enough to have any. She glanced at him. "Either way, it's worth knowing about. You read all of that from dinner. I read 32 12-year-olds every day. Adults are significantly less subtle." Nikolai looked at her in the dark of the back seat with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the almost amusement, not the assessment, not the careful flat line. Something that sat behind his eyes and didn't have a clean category yet. "Rafe has been managing the Detroit negotiations," he said. "The ones involving the Renner Group." Helena went still. "How long?" 6 months. "I didn't know until 2 weeks ago." "That's not a protective cousin, that's a liability." "Yes," Nikolai said. "That's exactly what he is." The car stopped in front of the brownstone. Helena didn't move immediately. Neither did he. "Does he know that you know?" she asked. "Not yet." "Then you have time, but not much." She reached for the door. "He was watching how Dmitri reacted to me. If he thinks I'm an asset, he'll want to use that. If he thinks I'm a threat to his position, he'll want to manage me instead." Nikolai caught her wrist again. Not brief this time. Not a pulse check. A hold. "Helena." His voice was different, quieter, or maybe just more present. "Be careful what you see." She turned and looked at him. "People who see too clearly in this world," he said, "become either very valuable or very dangerous. There's very little middle ground." Helena looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. "Good thing I've been managing dangerous rooms my whole life," she said. She got out of the car. She made it to the 3rd floor, unlocked her apartment, closed the door behind her, and stood in the entrance for a full 30 seconds without turning on the light. Her pulse was still not as steady as she would have liked. She was going to need to do something about that. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Helena established a routine. She woke at 6, made coffee in the kitchen that still felt slightly too nice for someone who had previously owned exactly 2 matching mugs, packed her bag for school, and left through the side entrance before 7. She taught her 5 periods, ate lunch at her desk while grading or planning, and was back in Lincoln Park by 4:30 most days. On Tuesdays, Nikolai was in the building, not on her floor. She rarely saw him, but the cars were different out front on Tuesdays, and the quiet in the building had a different texture, more occupied, more alert, and she had learned to register it the way you learn to register weather. On the 3rd Tuesday, he knocked on her door at 7 in the evening. She opened it in her school clothes, red pen still in hand, half a class set of essays on the couch behind her. He looked at the pen, then the essays, then her. "I need 40 minutes," he said. "There's a situation." "Come in." She stepped back without ceremony, moved the essays to the coffee table in a stack and sat back down. "What kind of situation?" Nikolai sat in the chair across from her. He did not look comfortable, not because the chair wasn't adequate, but because sitting in someone's living space and not having his back to a wall seemed to be a configuration he hadn't fully resolved yet. She had noticed this at his uncle's house, too. He always found the position that controlled the room. Tonight he couldn't because it was her room. She found that interesting. "Rafe met with a representative from the Renner Group 4 days ago," Nikolai said. "In Detroit. He told Dmitri it was a fishing trip. And you know because I have people in Detroit, right?" Helena set her pen down. "Does Dmitri know yet?" "No. I need to be certain before I bring it to him. Dmitri and Rafe's father were close. This will cost him something. How certain are you now?" 90%. "I need the other 10. Helena looked at him. "What does the other 10 require?" "Rafe called me this morning. He wants to have dinner. The 3 of us. You, him, me. He said he wants to get to know you better." The room was quiet for a moment. "He's checking how much I know," Helena said. "Yes. And you want me to be there because you read him better than I did at Dmitri's table." Nikolai said it with the particular directness of someone who found admitting this neither comfortable nor avoidable. "I see Rafe as family. That makes me slower. You have no such delay." Helena looked at the stack of essays on the coffee table. Period 3. Destiny's was on top again, a new draft of the testing policy argument, significantly stronger than the first. She thought about what she'd told her students last week. The most important skill isn't finding the answer. It's learning to sit in the room where the answer is hiding and wait without flinching. "When?" she asked. "Thursday. I have 48-hour notice in the contract. Today is Monday. That's 56 hours. You planned ahead." That almost expression again. "I'm capable of reading documents I sign." The restaurant Rafe chose was in River North, loud enough to swallow conversations, which Helena clocked immediately as intentional. He was already at the table when they arrived, standing to greet them, smiling the way people smiled when the smile was constructed rather than caused. He kissed Helena's cheek in greeting. She smiled back with exactly the warmth the moment required. "Helena, you look wonderful." Rafe held her chair, a gesture that managed to be simultaneously courteous and proprietary. "I feel terrible that we didn't get more time at Uncle Dimitri's dinner. You made quite an impression." "Dmitri is easy to talk to," she said. "He actually listens, which is rarer than it should be." "He does." Rafe settled back into his seat with the relaxed posture of someone who wanted to project ease. It means a lot to him, having Nikolai settled, having someone in the household. "I imagine it would." Helena reached for her water glass. "He worried, you know, for years. Nikolai's work is demanding. It's hard to find someone who can exist in that world without losing themselves." He looked at her with warm, careful eyes. "You seem remarkably composed for someone who arrived in all of this so recently." "7th graders," Helena said pleasantly. "Nothing after that is particularly surprising." Rafe laughed. Across the table, Nikolai said nothing, which was exactly right. She had told him before they arrived. "Let me talk. You watch him watch me." "How much do you know about the business?" Rafe asked, refilling her water glass with the attentiveness of someone performing attentiveness. "Nikolai can be private. I want to make sure you're not navigating blind." There it was, the offer dressed as concern. Helena looked at him with an expression she used for students who were trying to negotiate their grade after the semester ended. Kind, clear, and completely unmovable. "Nikolai tells me what I need to know, when I need to know it," she said. "I trust that process." Of course. Rafe smiled. I only mention it because there are things in motion right now. The Detroit expansion, some complications with territory, things that could affect the household directly. I'd hate for you to be caught off guard. That's thoughtful, Helena said. What kind of complications? Rafe's eyes moved to Nikolai for one fraction of a second before returning to her. She caught it. She had been waiting for it. Nothing specific, more a general. Climate. Some parties are resistant to the expansion. He tilted his head. Has Nikolai mentioned the Renner group? He mentions what's relevant. Helena smiled. He's very efficient that way. The dinner continued. Rafe tried 3 more approaches, each one slightly different in angle, each one carrying the same underlying question. How much do you know? And how much can I tell you before you tell him? Helena deflected each one with the particular skill of someone who had spent years managing rooms full of people who thought they were being subtle. By dessert, Rafe knew nothing more than he'd arrived with, and Helena knew everything she needed. The car home was quiet for 6 blocks. He's not working for the Renners, Helena said. Nikolai turned to look at her. He's working toward them. There's a difference. She watched the city move past the window. He doesn't want to hand them the operation. He wants to position himself as the bridge, the person both sides need. If he controls the negotiation, he controls the outcome. And if he controls the outcome, he controls the succession. Nikolai's voice was flat in a way she recognized as the specific flatness that covered something structural being rearranged. Dmitri is 61 and in poor health. Rafe knows that timeline better than anyone. Helena turned to face him. He's not betraying the family. He's betting on which version of the family survives. Nikolai was quiet for a long time. He grew up in my house, he said. I know. After his parents. He lived with us for 4 years. I know, Nikolai. He's not. He stopped. Started again. I was certain it was the Renners using him. It hadn't occurred to me that the direction ran the other way. Because you think in terms of protection. Who threatens the family and from where? Helena kept her voice even. Rafe thinks in terms of position. It's a different logic. Not worse necessarily. Just different enough that your pattern recognition didn't catch it. Nikolai looked at her. She had learned over 3 weeks to hold that look without rearranging herself. It still required something. You're going to have to tell Dmitri, she said, before Rafe makes a move that forces your hand publicly. Private first. Always. Yes. And you need to give Rafe a choice before it becomes a crisis. If he thinks the wall is already closing, he'll accelerate. Give him an exit that doesn't cost him everything. Why? Not arguing. Genuinely asking. Because you said he grew up in your house, Helena said. And because the kind of man who loses family twice usually doesn't come back from it the same way. The car stopped in front of the brownstone. Neither of them moved immediately. You understood that about me? Nikolai said quietly. From the compass rose. Yes. And you're applying it to Rafe. I'm applying it to you. Rafe is the situation. You're the one who has to live with how it's handled afterward. Nikolai looked at her in the dark of the car, with that expression she still didn't have a clean category for. Except it was closer now, the edges of it more defined, and she was becoming increasingly aware that the compartment she had built for things about Nikolai Volkov she didn't know what to do with was getting crowded. Helena. His voice was quiet and direct, and not cold at all. Don't, she said, gently. Not yet. A pause. He understood. She knew he understood because he nodded once. Small, precise, a man accepting terms he considered reasonable. Good night, he said. Good night, Nikolai. She got out of the car, climbed to the 3rd floor, and stood in her kitchen in the dark for a long time, her hands around a mug that had long since gone cold. The bookshelf caught the streetlight through the eastern window. To Kill a Mockingbird on the end of the 2nd shelf, exactly where it had been since the first day. Her favorite book. On a shelf he had filled before she arrived. She was going to need more compartments. Nikolai told Dmitri on a Wednesday morning. Helena knew because her phone stayed silent until noon, then buzzed once. A single message from a number she no longer needed to check. It's done. He's handling it. She read it between periods, standing in the hallway outside her classroom while 32 7th graders resettled into their seats with the contained chaos of a weather system, finding its shape. She typed back, How is he? 4 minutes passed. Long, for Nikolai. He aged 10 years in 20 minutes. Then he straightened up and said we'd handle it as a family. Helena stood in the hallway and felt something open quietly in her chest. That's who he is, she wrote. Yes, he replied. I keep forgetting that about him. She put her phone away and went back to her classroom. But she carried the message with her for the rest of the day. Not the words, but the 4 minutes it had taken him to send them. Nikolai Volkov, who responded to everything in under 60 seconds, had needed 4 minutes to find the language for something that had moved him. She was learning to read what lived in his silences. Rafe came to the brownstone 4 days later. Helena answered the door, made coffee, and held the space with the quiet skill of someone who understood that the most important thing she could do in the next hour was be present without being intrusive. The conversation between the two men took 40 minutes. Helena sat with her grade book on the couch, close enough to be a presence, far enough to be absent, a boundary she had understood without being asked to hold it. When Rafe left, he stopped at the door. "You knew at dinner." Not an accusation, just truth. Yes. She gave him accuracy instead of comfort, because he had earned the first and didn't need the second. He nodded slowly. Something in his expression shifted, not quite gratitude, but its quieter cousin. He left. Nikolai came to sit beside her on the couch, one cushion between them, and then, deliberately, unhurriedly, he closed it. "Is it resolved?" she asked. "For now." Rafe steps back from Detroit. Dmitri is restructuring his role. He looked at his hands. "It won't be simple, but it won't become what it was going to become. That's enough for today." Yes. The apartment held its quiet. Outside, Chicago moved in its usual way. Traffic, the lake wind pressing against the glass, the low percussion of the city going on with itself. "Helena." His voice was the quietest she had heard it. "I know." She turned to face him fully. "I need to say something first." He waited. She had learned that about him too. He never rushed what she was building toward. "I've been thinking about the kidney." She held his gaze. "Not the testing, not the compatibility, not the contract. I've been thinking about what I actually want." She paused. "And I want to do it." His expression shifted. That focused, careful attention. "Not because of the debt. There is no debt. You said so yourself. Not because of the arrangement or what I signed." She felt the words come from somewhere she had been protecting for weeks. The sealed compartment finally opened. "I want to do it because somewhere between the contract and the bookshelf and watching you carry your family's pain like it was yours alone to manage, I stopped seeing you as a transaction, and a person you love, a person you have chosen, is someone whose life you fight for. That's what this is." The word landed in the room and stayed there. Love. Neither of them looked away from it. Nikolai reached out and took her hand, his whole hand, fully present, no pulse check, no brief hold, staying. "Helena." His voice was different, stripped of every layer of management she had watched him maintain for months. "I have spent 8 years making certain nothing in my life existed outside my control. You walked into your own living room and refused to sit down when I told you to, and I have not recovered from it since." The corner of her mouth moved. "That's your version of a confession? I'm working on a better one." "Don't." She laced her fingers through his. "I love that you mean exactly what you say." He looked at their hands, then at her face, and Nikolai Volkov, who had stood in silence like he owned it, who had held every expression at a careful distance for as long as she had known him, let her see him completely. No flat line, no managed distance. Just a man who had learned over months of collision and negotiation and the patient, specific work of two people choosing each other past every reason not to, who had arrived, finally, at something true. "I love you," he said. Precise, unguarded, final, the way facts were final. That is the accurate version. Helena felt it land in every room inside her she had ever kept locked. "I know." She moved closer. "I've known for a while. I was waiting for you to catch up." He looked at her with something she had been cataloging in fractions for months. The almost expressions, the adjacent to amusement, the fraction of a second departures from his baseline, all of it resolving now into one full, unhurried, rearranging smile. She decided she would spend a considerable amount of her life making sure that happened again. She leaned in and kissed him. Not arranged, not performed. The quiet and deliberate meeting of two people who had earned the moment through every difficult and honest thing that came before it. He kissed her back like a man who had been careful with everything his whole life and had finally found something worth being reckless about. 1 year later, the surgery took 4 hours. Helena came out of the anesthesia in a private room with afternoon light falling through clean windows, and Nikolai in the chair beside the bed, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a worn copy of her Dostoevsky open on his knee. He had been there long enough that the book was nearly finished. She watched him for a moment before he noticed she was awake. This man who had walked into her apartment like a fact of nature and stayed until he became something else entirely, who had filled a bookshelf before she arrived, who had needed 4 minutes to describe being moved and had thought she wouldn't notice the difference. She had noticed every single thing. "Hey!" Her voice came out rough with anesthesia. He was beside her in one movement. "How do you feel?" Like someone who made a decision she'd make again tomorrow. She managed to smile. "How is he?" "Stable. Responding better than projected." His voice was steady, but his hand found hers immediately. The practiced ease of something that had become necessary over the past year. Dr. Harmon said the match was as close to ideal as he's ever seen. Of course it was. She looked at the Dostoevsky on the side table. "You finished it. Almost. You've been here all 4 hours reading my book. It's my book now. You gave it to me. I said you could borrow it." The distinction has blurred. His thumb moved across her knuckles. "Helena, Nikolai, I need to say something. You're allowed." She squeezed his hand. "We established that." He looked at her with the expression she loved most, the one with no management in it, no distance, no controlled flatline, just him, fully present, on the specific frequency that was only ever for her. "You donated part of yourself so that I could live longer," he said. "I want you to understand that I intend to use every additional year being worthy of that." Helena felt the tears before she decided to cry. She let them come because she had learned in a year of loving Nikolai Volkov that he needed to see the things he caused in her, not to manage them, but because seeing them was how he knew he was real to someone. "That's the better version," she said. "I told you I was working on it." She laughed, and it pulled at the incision, and she laughed anyway. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, careful of everything, careful of her. The gentleness of a man who had learned where she was fragile and had decided protecting those places was its own kind of devotion. "Vera wants to visit tomorrow," he said against her hair. "I told her to wait 3 days. You're going to lose that argument." "I know. I'm making the attempt for form's sake. Dmitri sends his love, his word, not mine. He also says you've ruined his chess metaphors because now he can't use the queen as an example without thinking of you and losing his train of thought. Tell him that's the highest compliment I've ever received." "I will. He'll be insufferable about it." Helena closed her eyes, kept his hand, felt the afternoon light warm across the blanket, the ambient sounds of the hospital, the ordinary beautiful machinery of a day continuing around the extraordinary fact of this one. She had walked into her own living room 11 months ago and found her father on his knees and a man by the window who looked at her like an equation he was solving. She had refused to sit down. She had asked the right questions, and somewhere between the contract and the compass rose and the bookshelf and 40 minutes of honest conversation, and one full, unhurried smile that rearranged a face she had memorized. She had found the thing she hadn't known she was looking for. Not rescue, not transaction, not debt paid or favor returned, just a man who meant exactly what he said, and a love that had been chosen, clearly and completely, by both of them. "Nikolai," she said without opening her eyes. "Yes. Next year. The contract renewal. Yes. I want to renegotiate every term." A pause. She felt him smile against her hair. "Those," he said quietly, "are the most acceptable terms anyone has ever offered me." She slept. He stayed. He was still there when she woke up. He would be still there in the morning, and all the mornings that came after.